8 hours, great. Okay, and we are live. Today is 7th of November, and this is Osro Daily Scrum. Here is Greg, Nick, and me. And Nick, let's start with you.
Sure.
And our board.
So what I started doing, I started my day by just messing around a bit on the Osra testing server and importing a couple of, or maybe just one, I can't remember, orphan list, creating and destroying a few sponsorships to see if anything would break, but everything held up. I'll take it as a good sign for now, but I'm not relaxing yet. The next thing that I started working on was, I recalled the discussion that I had with Motosim about the fact that agents, Osra agents, are going to be just the people who deal with sponsors, whereas there are other, let's say, categories of Osra employees and users who will be using the application. So the model would be much better called user rather than agent. So I spent quite a bit of time renaming that model and renaming everything associated with it within the application. But I think I got it all in place. So it's I created a new chore and I submitted a PR for it. And Craig started going over it. And then after that, I started working on this story, Add City to Sponsor. And at first, I started implementing it the way that we had discussed. I created a place model that would store city and country pairwise. And it was going to be to have an association to the sponsor model. But there were several moments of awkwardness that I saw with that design. It seemed like I was fighting against the kind of the proper structure. So what I actually did, I pretty much I left that branch, switched to another, and I simply added the city attribute to sponsor, and just to see what that function, how well that would work compared to the other implementation. And it certainly seems to be a more natural way to implement this. And when I started thinking about it, I couldn't remember why we decided to create this separate place model with associations. So Craig or Pavel, if either one of you remembers.
I can. Yeah, there was a difference of opinion, and I didn't give enough of an opinion of it to argue with the other guys that we should
Alex and Brian, I think.
Yeah, for a cleaner abstraction. And to be honest with you, given that you've been landed with the story, even if we'd agreed to do the better abstraction, if I had got the story, I would have done it the way you're talking about doing it. If they were taking on the story and they wanted to go for a cleaner abstraction in inverted commas, that's fine, and I have no problems with it. But I don't think there's any issues with the way you've gone.
Okay, because what it started feeling to me was that this implementation, the one with this places model, we were taking it, it was kind of halfway in between.
Yeah.
Either we should have had a country model and a city model, with city, a country having many cities and city belonging to a country, and then sponsor associated with a city.
I think it was going to be a places model, wasn't it?
Well, see, the places model, the way we've kind of defined it is that it stores both city and country. And there are two things that come out of this. One is that country is going to end up being duplicated a lot, right? Because for every city from Saudi Arabia that you add, you end up Saudi Arabia showing up
Yeah.
in countries.
So you want to normalize that.
Yeah, and then the other thing, and there are ways around all of this. I'm not saying that this is, broken completely, but the other thing was that if, for example, you create two sponsors and they're both associated with a place whose city name is London and country is UK. So they're both associated with the same object, the same place object. And then for one of them you realize, oh no, wait a minute, it's not London, UK, it's London, Canada. And you go into that sponsor and you change it now from London, UK to London, Canada, and that of course updates the same place object that the other sponsor was linked to as well. That's how it would happen if you had the nested attributes, nested forms. So you would have to have this additional workaround that if I'm changing the place, you need to create a new record. Yeah. And then there are, of course, extra validations to ensure that you're not creating a duplicate. If that record already exists, then you reassociate with that record instead of creating a new one. Like it just seems like too much work for no clear benefit to me.
Yeah. And for what they're talking about, 12 or 20 cities, yeah, I'm fully on board with that, and that makes sense.
Okay. So yeah, so that's how I'm implementing it at the moment, and I think now that I've settled on this course of action, I think it's going to be faster and smoother sailing from here on out. So sometime on the weekend, I'm hoping to submit a PR. And I do need to go through Brian's pull requests. I left a comment on his, on both of his pull requests that he has open. I'm not sure what's happening there. It's possible that we have some kind of a fundamental disagreement about the role of tests in the application. Or possibly I'm just not understanding his implementation very well yet, but I think that's going to turn into a longer conversation than just a simple code review. And I think that's it for me.
Okay. Nick, when you're sharing, please choose only stories.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, and also, I don't know, it was today or maybe many months ago, but I haven't seen it before. If you go to board configure the board and choose columns, yeah, you have now that checkbox days and column. If you click it and then return to board, you can see how many days the story or task the current stage. It's just on the most left corner of every story or every task with small circles.
Yeah.
Circles are bright, so you even cannot notice them, but when later it became and we can understand how long do we have. For example, with author 184 we have for a very long time in result stage, and we need to do something with it. Why it is there for so long time? Why the client still hasn't accepted it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? I realized that sometime before the Scrum, but since I closed my computer, I received some emails from the client or some updates on Google+. So I'll check right now to see what it was that they said.
Okay. Okay, Craig.
My existing chore is kind of semi on hold at the moment. Because Motorsim is going to be working on adding Father is Alive field to the spreadsheet, and really there's no point in submitting a pull request to amend it and resubmit a new pull request. So I think he's working on that before he works on his next story, and once we have those spreadsheets in place, we can set up the config file and get tests passing. Because at the moment, the model's been changed, but the spreadsheet hasn't, so tests are failing on that PR. Once I've got that, I'll take that forward. I've been having a look at the app today with the view for it, with the viewpoint of it going into production, and I've set myself up some new chores on Osra. So I've set up 3 chores, and I need to go through them basically as and when I get time.
What are the chores, Greg?
Before I dive into that, do you know if we've had clarification from the client on which filters they want on the index views?
Any index views or for a particular model?
For each of the index views.
I don't think that was ever discussed, was it?
Right. But I don't know, and I assumed it wasn't, but I think we need to clarify what they want in terms of filters, because some of those filters have a massive performance hit in terms of rendering the view when we start to get more than 4 or 5 records on there. So,
okay.
So that's what Osra 244's all about.
Yeah.
And to give it, to put it in some sort of perspective, if we've got 600 orphans on there, and we have filters that are not performant, we're looking at sort of around about 900 milliseconds to 1.2 seconds render time, which is unacceptable. If we take those filters off, we're down to about 350 milliseconds. So and that gap, so that's a roughly a 3x change, and that gap increases as the number of orphans increase.
And this is when you're using filters, or just to
that's just for the index view, because the active admin makes lots of queries to the database to fill in those drop-down boxes and whatnot.
Right. Okay.
And there's other little bits and pieces that I need to tidy up, like default scopes, including relationships and what have you. But we can have a look at those as I go through the chore and submit the PRs. It's just odds and sods.
Okay.
252 that you see there is, we've talked about this before, and we said we'd keep the, as soon as we went to phase 0 and the API had stabilized, we'd index unique columns on the database side, and while we're indexing them, we really need to make sure that they're unique indexes, because although the validation in Rails helps to an extent, it's still possible if you don't have the unique index on the database. If one person amends a value, I know it's unlikely currently, but if one person amends the value in between someone checking that it's not there and then updating a value, you'll have 2 duplicate records on the database.
Yeah. You know, I have to say I never understood why Sampriti and Brian were so, Sampriti especially, he was very much against any database validations, or constraints rather, and I couldn't quite follow the logic. I mean, there was talk of, we shouldn't duplicate, or we shouldn't have something here, something there, but to me that structure was always very clear, that we, everything, absolutely everything is validated in Active Record, and then some of the more key, perhaps, attributes are also constrained at the database level. But for some reason, I guess they have a lot of trust in Active Record, and
Yeah, I think also not many of them have developed. I mean, when you're dealing with, this is going to sound really patronizing, but when you deal with, say, Agile Ventures as a project, if something gets duplicated or a validation fails and the data's not slightly right, it's not the end of the world. When you're moving into enterprisey things and there's maybe a legal issue there, or you're losing revenue, or a whole raft of things it could be, then suddenly those constraints become so much more important.
yeah.
I just think it depends. It's horses for courses, isn't it? It depends on the app that you're writing, and you need to be critical. And what we don't want is to make a backside of all Osra's data when it goes live. And the chance of any one of these things happening is maybe really, really minuscule. But when you add them all up, statistically, at some point, one of those things are going to happen. And I just think, if we didn't want all the benefits that a relational database brings, then we should be using MongoDB or Cassandra or any of the NoSQL databases. I think, given that you've chosen Postgres, you should be using Postgres for what it's good at, and part of that's ensuring that your unique records are unique.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm with you. I think we were on the same page from the beginning on this.
Yeah, definitely. And then just that's going to be a tiny task, but and it may not even be a task. There may be none there. But just when I made that comment earlier, I just thought I'd go through and check them all.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
Okay, Alex?
Actually looking forward to picking another story. I don't know if I still need to reissue the pull request. I think I was going through some comments that were made yesterday, and something went wrong with accepting the pull request. So I don't know if I need to reissue that.
You do. I was a very naughty boy. I didn't notice. I'd asked you to rebase. I'm not even going to try and excuse it, but basically, I pulled something that I shouldn't do, and you need to rebase that stuff. Are you comfortable with rebasing? Because I think you said you'd rebased, but
yeah, I'd rebased using the developer version, the developer branch.
Okay, because it didn't look like it had been rebased at all, and that's where I made my error. I merged it even though it had commits in there that shouldn't have been. So anyway, to cut a long story short, you need to make that pull request again, and if you're having and rebase it, and if you're having problems with the rebase, then we can get together in a hangout and we can go through a rebase together. That's not a problem.
No problem.
Yeah, but other than the fact that it needs resubmitted and it needs rebase, I think it's ready to merge, isn't it, Nick?
Yes, it was. I was happy with the pull request.
Yeah. So you're free to pick another story, and once we've got that ready to merge, we'll merge it in.
All right.
I'm not sure how we'd go about picking a story at this point, Alex. We're rapidly approaching the end of this sprint, and something needs to happen at the end of it, I suppose.
Let's look at our Scrum board.
Okay. I just have that email from it was from Tarek. What was accepted was OSRA 209. So if I go there, yeah, one thing was he confirmed the client meeting for Sunday, and the other one was OSRA 209, which I don't see in the result for some reason. Oh, here it is. Add validations to sponsor based on affiliate. So this is the story where if a sponsor type is organization, then it has to be affiliated with the organization. If it's branch, then it's branch. And none of these attributes can be changed for a persistent record. And I think that also takes care of OSRA 106, because the concern about it. Let's have a look at it. There were a lot of comments here, but basically the final version of the comments was exactly what we've just implemented, is that if we get the sponsor through organizations, type is organization. If we get them through OSRA, type is individual. In all cases, the gender is required, and it refers to the sponsor's gender. So basically, everything is, I think everything is in place. So that means that OSRA 209 is now done. And OSRA 106, which has been hanging around for a very long time, is now done too, and I can unflag it from here. Except I'm getting... Okay, let me do this backwards. Okay, there we go. So, and a few more points against our burned down chart.
Yes, just 1 point. What about our other stories?
Well, most of them shows. Most of mine not shows.
Well, one is the importer, and we haven't shown it to the client yet. And before we do, I think we need to decide what to do about that whole XLS scenario. Is this something we just tell the client to watch out for? Do we require them to convert everything to CSV?
Do you ever recall saving an XLS file as an XLSX or vice versa? I'm not saying it won't happen. I'm just saying that...
For me, it's not a natural workflow.
No.
I don't, like we said the other day, we don't know what Office suite they're using, if it's Excel or one of the other suites, and I'm not familiar with any of those. The OpenOffice or LibreOffice, I don't know them. So yeah, I don't know what to do about that. Other than that, though, I think the import functionality it seems to be there, and it's fairly robust. I think it's ready for the client to evaluate. I haven't had, as I said, we haven't had any failures on the testing server, so it seems to have been related maybe to that original bug fix, and all the old records needed to be cleared out. But now that they have been, maybe everything is fine. Other stories that are resolved, this is something that I've pinged the client on, but I haven't heard back.
I think I have, well, I don't know, Alex, maybe you can investigate the problem with XLS with the gem, more details to understand details.
Which particular gem?
The gem that we are using to import XLS files, because it is a very annoying thing that we have our Heroku-based server crashed when you import the wrong format of file. And maybe we need to, if you have time to do, the better thing you can do is to investigate the problem. You need to understand who else using this gem and who else face the same problem and what are the reasons of that problem.
No problem. I could do that investigation.
That is very important.
So, Alex, specifically what Brian did, he took an XLSX file, so the XML version, and in the save dialog box, he manually gave it an extension of XLS without the X at the end. And when he tried to import that file, the application crashed.
All right. I'll have a look at that. No problem. I can investigate.
And the gems, ROO, R-O-O.
Oh, yeah, Nick has just sent me a link.
Oh, magic.
Yeah, thanks.
because on Sunday we have client meeting and we can suggest them to use CVS files, for example, or only XLSX files, or maybe we will find another decision.
Well, even if we don't have a solution, I mean, I think they're using Excel. I don't know, so we need to ask. But from what Motisum's said, that's the feeling I get. And as long as they understand that they save files in the correct extension, otherwise they crash the server, you know, I can't. I've I've worked with some people who have been, let's say, IT challenged, and I don't ever recall seeing anyone save as and then give it the wrong extension. I mean, normally you don't even get the extension pop up, do you?
Yeah. It almost sounds like the kind of an issue that we shouldn't bring up with the client, because if we do, then they start being a little paranoid and
But if we know a particular extension can crash the system, why not enforce before you even do the importation that if it's the wrong extension, block it?
It doesn't crash if. It doesn't crash when you upload an XLS file. It doesn't crash when you upload an XLSX file. It only crashes when you take an XLSX file and rename it effectively so it ends in .xls.
Not renaming, Craig. Save.
It is renaming. You know, save as, it's the same thing. I mean, it doesn't matter which way you do it. What you're doing is you're taking an XLS XML file and you're giving it an XLS extension. Whether you do that through the Save As dialog box or go into Windows Explorer and knock the X off the end, you're doing the same thing.
No, I thought it was a save as using Excel or another spreadsheet program, because that would have even changed the actual format.
Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, they make an XLSX file and then they say file save as, and in the file type they say XLSX, but they call it file.xls.
Yeah, that's correct. The problem only shows up when there is a mismatch between the file content and the file extension, and in the normal workflow that doesn't happen. So a user has to purposely override what Excel suggests for them. So in that sense, I think if there is an easy way to validate whether the file is in XML format or not before opening it, then that might be something that we might consider. But otherwise, I'm not sure to what lengths we want to go here.
I would agree.
And then going through our result stories, like I said, 184 is something I asked the client about. 233 and 234, they're a part of the story that I'm working on currently, so it's not ready yet. Orphan gender filter. This is now merged into develop, but it hasn't been pushed up to staging because that would push the importer to staging, and I've been holding off on doing that. But I think if we're comfortable with the importer being ready to be demoed, then there will be a couple of other stories that come together with it.
Alex is looking for another story. Now, I know this isn't phase 0, but given that he's quite familiar with the view side of it, what about OSRA 124? Sorry, OSRA 119.
You're in the plan.
Backlog, sorry.
Yeah, navigation menu display. Oh yeah, this is where they don't want the nav bar to change, right? Yeah.
I mean, is that something that interests you, Alex?
I have no problem with doing that.
Okay, so two things then. Investigational problem and that one. When you have time.
But investigation, Alex, as we said, don't spend too much time on it. I think it's, if there is an easy precaution to take here, then we should. But otherwise, I think it can go ahead as is.
All right.
And this navigation menu, I think, don't hesitate. If a story doesn't appeal to you, then we can easily find something else.
No, I can have a go at it. I haven't really looked at the changes that the navigation menu does, but I can have a go at it.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Well, any other questions to discuss?
At the risk of sounding cheeky, are you able to ask that question about what filters they want on what views, Nick, in Google Plus?
Yeah, I can send that. Basically, yeah, I'll try to make it as open-ended of a question as possible. I don't want to steer them in any particular direction.
Yeah, I don't want to close down options, but then when we know what they want, we can look at making each filter performant rather than it all.
Okay, so I'll ask the question without mentioning anything about performance, just to ask which filters do you want, and then if they say we want them all, then we have some work to do.
Yeah, or we have to go back and say certain ones are unless they're very important, would be worth taking off.
I guess if there's any kind of way to, like I know it essentially plucks the values out of the database to populate those collections.
Yeah.
But if there is a way to, I don't know, just create a collection of whatever common values are, or instead of it polling the database every time, it just we create an array for it to consult instead.
Yeah, some of the definitely, absolutely, but some of them also don't make much sense.
I can imagine. Yeah, I mean, thinking
so like
about
address, filtering on a dress, really, if the dress field was more structured, that might be helpful. But if they wanted to filter on a dress rather than it being a drop-down box of all these address objects, we'd be better off having the equals search type box that you see on ActiveAdmin, and that probably wouldn't query the database. It would query the database after they put the filter in, rather than getting all the objects to fill in a combo box. So, as I say, let's not second guess what they want, and let's see what they want and come up with the best that we can for them based on their needs.
Okay, I'll send the question tonight.
Your star.
Me? What else?
I think that's it, isn't it? Our burn down chart is looking kind of sad. But
yeah, I think part of this is that we're left with a lot of hindsight's a wonderful thing, but if we had have had the hindsight at the start, I mean, there's lots of chores that we need to get done ready for the end of phase 0, and they haven't been. So you're sorting out the server at the moment, and
well, I'm not actually.
Well, okay, but if you had the chance to, if it was all those jobs that need to be done kind of aren't on there, and that so while we've been developing, we've sort of had quite a good velocity, and then it's just suddenly disappeared, hasn't it? Because all these things are coming out of the woodwork, and they're not really being represented in very well. I think there's an element of that, certainly.
Yeah, I agree with that. But we added, Oh yeah, these were the stories that we couldn't vote on. Here are 3 major stories that took us up instead of down here. These are the ones that we voted after the sprint began. So we got this bump here in the wrong direction. But anyway.
Okay. Well.
Oh,
Yeah.
emails. I see you've changed them, but you didn't have to if there weren't genuine ones.
Well, they were not genuine, but you know, I put our names as orphans at some point.
Yeah, I don't mind any of that. It was just
Yeah, but
it was,
you know, with Tarek and Ahmed and Ranim, I don't know how they feel about public exposure. So
yeah.
I think it's a good idea not to have any of that in there.
Okay.
Well, then see you on Sunday at the client meeting, or maybe tomorrow on America's Scrum.
All right.
Take care, guys.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.